Helen Mathers jolted awake to the sound of her 10-year-old son's scream. One moment she'd been dozing by the wood stove. The next, Toby's voice was ringing with terror from his bedroom. "Toby!" she cried, leaping up. No answer, just the wind keening outside. Helen's hands shook as she snatched up her oil lamp. In its glow, she saw Toby's bed empty, covers flung aside, and the window above it wide open. Frigid air and snow blew into the room. Her heart seized. Toby was gone. Helen clambered through the open window out into the night, still in her nightgown and socks. The December cold bit into her skin, but panic drove her forward. Outside, a dusting of new snow revealed a single set of small footprints leading away from the house toward the looming silhouette of spruce trees. "Toby!" she shouted, voice thin in the howling wind. No answer. Why would he leave the house? Was he sleepwalking, chasing something? Helen threw on her coat and boots and, lamp in hand, began to follow the tracks. The snow came up to her calves, and each breath seared her lungs with cold. Fear gnawed at her insides as she trudged as fast as she could, the lamp's light quivering in her grip. Halfway to the tree line, an intense white radiance suddenly flared to life among the pines. Helen skidded to a halt, eyes wide. It was as if a giant spotlight had flipped on, flooding the woods with a harsh, bluish glare. Black tree shadows fanned across the ground. Shielding her face, Helen squinted into the brilliance and saw a dark shape rising up beyond the treetops. A small, limp figure. It was Toby. He was floating upward, arms and legs dangling, as if some invisible force was lifting him into the sky. Helen screamed, dropping the lamp and sprinting forward. "Toby!" She could barely see through the blinding light, but she ran straight toward her son. A deep, resonant whir filled the air. Helen slammed into an unseen wall of pressure that stopped her in her tracks. The hair on her arms lifted with static electricity. Above, Toby's body was being pulled into a huge hovering object, some kind of metallic disc, hanging just above the trees. The blinding beam poured from its underside. "No! Let him go!" Helen shrieked. She pushed forward with all her strength, but a wave of force and sound suddenly blasted out from the craft, knocking her off her feet. She was hurled backward into a snowbank, her head striking the frozen ground in an explosion of white sparks. Dazed and gasping, Helen looked up just in time to see the pillar of light snap off. In the dim afterglow, a massive saucer-shaped silhouette was visible for an instant against the starry sky. Then, with a whoosh of displaced air, it shot upward and vanished into the swirling clouds. The clearing plunged back into darkness. Only the Aurora Borealis remained overhead, its green ribbons flickering quietly as if nothing had happened. "Toby!" Helen croaked into the empty night. She staggered to her feet, sobbing, and stumbled toward the spot beneath where the light had been. The snow there was melted in a wide circle, wisps of steam curling up into the frigid air. At the center of that circle, Toby's footprints simply stopped. Helen fell to her knees, numb to the cold seeping through her thin nightclothes. Her trembling fingers found something half buried in the slush. Toby's little red knit hat, still warm but singed around the edges, as if scorched by fire. She clutched the hat to her chest and threw her head back, letting out a wail of anguish that was swallowed by the vast, empty Alaskan night. By mid-morning, word had spread through tiny Port Willow that Toby was missing. Helen joined a handful of townsfolk and Sheriff Alan Hughes in combing the tree line and tundra behind her cabin, calling Toby's name into the cold stillness. But they found no trace beyond the spot where his small footprints had vanished in a circle of trampled, melted snow. By afternoon, a new blizzard loomed and Sheriff Hughes reluctantly called off the day's search. He approached Helen by her gate, face grave. "We covered everything within 5 miles. No sign of him. We have to stop for now, Helen. It's too dangerous with the storm coming." "You're giving up?" Helen's voice trembled with rage and despair. "We'll resume at first light," Hughes said, placing a gloved hand on her shoulder. His eyes were heavy with sympathy. But in this cold, if Toby was out there all night, Helen knew what he meant. The implication made her stomach lurch. No, she snarled, shrugging off his hand. Toby didn't just wander off and freeze. Something took him, Alan. I saw it. Hughes's brow furrowed. Helen, you fell and hit your head. In the dark and panic, you might have imagined. I know what I saw, she snapped. He was pulled into the sky by something not human. The sheriff glanced away, his breath a cloud of concern. Helen, there's no evidence of that. No footprints, no sign of anyone else. It's far more likely he got lost. Helen's eyes flashed. I lost Jack to this wilderness. I'm not losing Toby too. Her husband had died in a storm 3 years ago, a tragedy the town still remembered. I won't accept that he's gone. My son is alive, and I'm going to find him, with or without your help. Hughes opened his mouth, then closed it and nodded faintly. We'll keep searching, he said softly, though doubt tinged his voice. Blinking back tears, Helen turned and trudged to her cabin as the first flakes of the new snowstorm swirled in the dim afternoon light. Inside, she latched the door and slid to the floor, exhaustion crashing over her. Every muscle throbbed from a night and day of frantic effort. She hadn't eaten or slept, but grief gnawed at her far worse than hunger. Helen picked up Toby's knitted red hat from the table, the one she'd retrieved from the snow. The wool was singed around the edges. She pressed it to her face. Faintly, it still carried a hint of her boy's scent beneath the burnt odor. A sob racked her chest. Outside, the wind howled and the cabin's eaves creaked. Moving on autopilot, Helen stoked the wood stove and lit a kerosene lantern. She set it on the windowsill facing the yard, just in case, by some miracle, Toby found his way home through the dark. She paced the small room, heart jumping at every gust that rattled the door. She checked the lock twice. Her eyes kept drifting to the window, half expecting that unearthly glow to blossom again beyond the trees. If it did, she would be ready. In desperation, Helen grabbed Jack's old shortwave radio and tuned it to the emergency frequency. Pressing the transmit button, she made a plea into the void. This is Helen Mathers. Please, my 10-year-old son is missing. Can anyone hear me? Over. She released the button to static. No reply. She tried again and again, voice cracking, but heard nothing aside from the hiss of empty air. No one was coming to help. Tears of frustration burned in her eyes. At last, she set the radio aside and collapsed into Jack's old armchair by the stove, too shaken to even step into Toby's empty bedroom. The storm wind battered the walls outside as the lantern's glow cast trembling shadows across the cabin walls. At some point in the depths of that endless evening, Helen slipped into a tormented half-sleep. A sharp burst of static from the radio jolted Helen awake. She sat upright in the dark, heart pounding. The fire in the stove had dwindled to faint embers, and the lantern had burned out. For a moment she wondered if she'd imagined the noise. Then it came again. A crackling hiss from the shortwave receiver on the table. Helen snatched up the radio, twisting the dial. Through the static, a faint voice emerged. A tiny, distorted whisper. Mom! Her breath caught. Toby? She pressed the speaker to her ear, hands shaking. Cold? Mom? Help? The words warbled in and out. It was her son's voice. She was certain. Helen nearly sobbed with relief. She mashed the transmit button. Toby, I'm here. Baby, I hear you. Only static answered. Then, through the fuzz, dark, so dark. The signal faded, then surged again with a final, urgent plea. They're coming back. Helen's blood turned to ice. The ones who had taken him. Toby, who's coming? Where are you? She shouted desperately into the receiver. A shrill whine of feedback squealed from the speaker. Then the transmission went dead. No, Toby, come back, Helen begged, frantically adjusting knobs, but the frequency had fallen silent. For a moment she knelt there in the dark, flooded with equal parts terror and hope. Toby was alive. He had somehow reached out to her. But his captors were with him, and they were coming back. Coming back here? Maybe to the place they'd taken him from. Helen's resolve hardened. If those creatures were returning, she would be waiting. She threw on her heavy parka and boots and grabbed a flare gun from Jack's old emergency kit. Heart hammering, Helen yanked open the door and plunged into the stormy night once more. Helen fought through blinding snow toward the spruce grove where Toby had vanished. The wind howled and flung needles of ice against her parka, but she pressed on. At last, she broke into the clearing behind the house, a broad expanse of unbroken white beneath a moonless sky. Above, curtains of green aurora shimmered between tattered storm clouds, casting an otherworldly glow over the snow. Her heart thundered. Helen stepped to the center of the clearing, gripping the flare gun in one hand and her flashlight in the other. She could just make out the faint depression in the drift where Toby's footprints had ended the night before. This was the place. Mustering all her courage, she tipped back her head and shouted into the darkness, "I know you're out there. Come on, come back and face me." Her voice echoed against the silent trees. Only the wind answered. Helen's fist tightened around the cold metal of the flare gun. To announce herself, she raised it and pulled the trigger. With a loud whoosh, a streak of red shot into the sky and burst, flooding the clearing with a lurid crimson glow. The snowy field lit up in flickering blood-red light and shadow. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then a low vibration began to hum through the air, resonating in Helen's chest. The aurora overhead rippled violently as an immense shape descended through the ragged clouds. A brilliant beam of bluish-white light suddenly stabbed down from the sky, turning night into day. Helen staggered, throwing up an arm to shield her eyes from the glare. High above, a dark saucer-like form eclipsed the stars, the same craft she'd seen the night before. "Give me back my son!" Helen screamed over the electric hum. As if in reply, the pillar of light intensified. Through squinted eyes, Helen saw a small figure materializing within the glow, slowly descending to the ground. "Toby!" She dashed forward. Toby hung suspended a few feet above the snow, limp and unconscious. Helen reached into the radiance and dragged her son out of that unnatural light, clutching him to her chest. He was alive, warm to the touch, but pale and motionless. "It's okay. I've got you," she whispered, tears of relief spilling down her face. A chittering hiss sounded from above. Helen looked up, still holding Toby, and her blood ran cold. Descending along the column of light was a tall, spindly figure. It stepped into the clearing with impossible lightness, coming to stand on the snow. In the quivering auroral glow, Helen saw the being clearly. It stood over 7 feet tall, grotesquely thin, with long, rubbery limbs. Its skin was grayish and slick, and its head was bulbous and elongated, with a face dominated by 2 enormous black eyes. The creature's lipless mouth hung slightly open, revealing only darkness inside. Helen's body went rigid with fear. The alien tilted its head in an almost curious motion, regarding the tableau of mother and child. Its onyx eyes flicked to Toby, then to Helen. Helen pushed Toby behind her, bracing herself. Weakly, he had started to regain consciousness, whimpering in confusion. She could feel him clutching the back of her coat. The alien's mouth emitted another raspy hiss. Then it lunged. Helen barely had time to scream. A claw-like hand seized her left wrist, its grip like an iron vice. The flashlight tumbled from her grasp, its beam spinning crazily over the snow. Pain jolted up her arm. The creature's fingers were icy and impossibly strong. With a cry of panic, Helen raised the flare gun in her free hand and slammed it down onto the alien's arm. The sharp crack of impact echoed. The being recoiled with a shrill, inhuman screech, momentarily loosening its hold. Helen yanked her arm free and stumbled backward, planting herself in front of Toby. "Run!" she screamed at her son. "Toby, run!" Half conscious and terrified, Toby staggered back toward the tree line, away from the beam of light. The alien recovered almost instantly. It lashed out with a long limb, striking Helen across the face. The blow was like being hit with a steel bar. She cried out as she was knocked off her feet, stars bursting across her vision. She hit the ground hard, the breath driving from her lungs. Before she could scramble away, the creature's hand clamped around her ankle. Its spindly fingers wrapped completely around her boot and began dragging her toward the column of light. Helen clawed at the snow, kicking and screaming, but the thing's strength was overwhelming. Inch by inch, she was sliding backwards, her lower body now inside the blinding beam. "Mom!" Through her haze of panic, Helen heard Toby's voice. He had stopped at the edge of the clearing. Instead of fleeing, he now sprinted back toward her. "No! Stay back!" Helen gasped, terrified. She thrashed, trying in vain to shake free of the alien's grip. The beam's radiance engulfed her up to her waist. She could feel an intense pull from above, threatening to lift her completely. Toby didn't listen. He threw himself at his mother, grabbing onto her arms. He dug his heels into the snow and pulled with all his might. "I won't let go!" he sobbed, a fierce, desperate cry. For one agonizing moment, Helen was suspended between her son and the sky. The alien let out an angry chitter and yanked harder on her legs. Helen felt herself being slowly, inexorably lifted. Toby was being dragged forward with her, his boots skidding in the snow as he struggled not to lose her. She met her son's wide, terrified eyes. She had to save him. This was her only chance. "I love you, Toby," Helen choked out, pouring every ounce of feeling into the words. Then, with a sobbing breath, she mustered all her will and wrenched her hands free of his grasp. "Mom, no!" Toby screamed as her fingers slipped away. He fell backward into the snow, the sudden release sending him tumbling out of the beam's reach. Helen's body rose weightlessly as she was swept up into the column of light. Gravity fell away. She was floating, dizzy and blinded by the brilliance. Below, she saw Toby sprawled just outside the beam, scrambling to his knees with a look of horror. He reached out for her, wailing. Her heart shattered even as a strange calm crept over her. Toby was out of the light. He was safe from these creatures now. White light consumed Helen's vision. The last thing she felt was an icy, alien arm snaking around her waist, and then a searing flash of pain as she was pulled into the belly of the silent ship. When dawn broke over the frozen wilds, it found young Toby Mathers huddled at the forest's edge, alone and shivering. In his small, trembling hands, he clutched his mother's red knit hat, waiting for her to come back down from the stars.
If you enjoyed this video, please do not forget to like, comment, or share this video with your friends. Subscribe to our channel to hear more stories like this one.